Thinking clearly sounds simple, but I've realized it's one of the hardest things to do. Not because we're lazy or unmotivated, but because our brains aren't wired to think clearly, they're wired to think quickly. They're wired to help us protect from the environment, to react to things that could be a danger. And evolutionary, we are not really built to stop, think, and reflect and make good decisions. So we end up in a lot of situations where we're very impulsive, we're very reactive, we respond to stuff, and we really don't take the time to think. I know for myself, looking at how I've made decisions throughout my life, I've very much used my impulses, and the situation I was in would generally drive how I acted. And as I've got better at making decisions, I've started to create a little bit of a system for how to think about making good decisions, which I want to share with you guys today. And I like to think of the mind being like a camera, the camera being an analogy, and I'll go through the various phases, and hopefully that can relate to how you can make better decisions as well, because it's very powerful when you really start to think of what it really means to make good decisions. So let's use the camera analogy, and we'll use the lens that you're using on the camera. We'll use the frame in terms of what you're capturing in, and then we'll use the kind of settings or the tools that allow you to take a good picture. All right, so the first one is start with the lens. And this is how am I seeing things, all right? And this is very, very important. This is what I would call perspective overall, as the lens, what perspective I'm looking through. And this dictates so much. Very often in life, we zoom in. We zoom into the short term. We look at the current moment, this current person, this current thing that's triggering me. And we take a very zoomed in lens. We don't know we're doing this, but we're basically cutting out everything in our peripheral, everything long term. So we end up very zoomed in. And when we're zoomed in, emotions are very heightened and we miss a lot of details. All right, so one of the biggest skills you can learn to do is to zoom out from your situation, to see it from a higher vantage point, to see it from a longer perspective. So for example, if I'm struggling with something, often it's because I'm in a rush to get somewhere now. I need to get this project finished today. I need to get this YouTube video done now. If I could zoom out a little bit and give myself more time, maybe the YouTube video needs to be shot today, but a lot of things I could give a wider perspective. My goals I want to achieve, maybe I want to achieve them in 6 months or a year, and I can zoom out. In many situations, we zoom too far in. All right, so perspective is this kind of lens we're looking through. Another kind of perspective thing we fall for is make things personal. Everything feels personal. We live in our bodies, and everything feels like it's me against the world. If someone doesn't respond to a message, they're ignoring me. If someone cuts you off in traffic, they did this to me. And we make everything personal. You get unlucky in a situation. I work with poker players who get unlucky every day just by default of the job, and they feel like the victim. Why am I getting unlucky? Why aren't I getting success? Why is my hard work not paying off? All right, so we're in this kind of victim mode of thinking everything is against us. Or it's making it very personal. All right, so one of the skills we can learn there is to again, depersonalize it, to almost see an objective lens. What would somebody else see about the situation? Or what's actually true here? That's what I like to ask myself is, what's the reality of the situation? Not my personal story. We all have a personal story in every situation, especially if we care about it. We create our narrative. And how can we extrapolate what's my personal story, but what's actually real? What's true? And we can also put ourselves in someone else's perspective. And we realize that this is a good skill because let's say you've got a friend who has a problem, and it's a relationship problem, and it's somebody who they've been breaking up on and off a few times. You're not a relationship expert, but you'd probably be able to give your friend good advice. You'd go, you know what? This partner's not good for you for these reasons. You keep breaking up. I know you can't see it, but I think you should let this one go. And you give very good advice. And on the flip side, though, if they were giving you advice, or you were trying to give yourself advice, you might not see it. You had blind spots. So what we see here is when it's very personal, we're very in it, we can't give great advice to ourselves, but when we move away from it, just a little bit, a space, we can give very good advice. And we can do this to ourselves as well. We can go, if I wasn't caught in this personal narrative, what advice could I give myself in this situation? Right, like I said, it's hard to do when you are in a personal situation, but if we learn to remove ourselves, learn to think more objectively, and learn to think about the facts of the situation. So that's the first thing I like to think about, the lens I'm using. how zoomed in, zoomed out, how personal, like how close I am to it, and can I change something here? Can I change the lens I'm seeing through? Because once we change the lens, often the problems go away. It's crazy how many times I think I've got a problem that is a problem. In reality, it's a perspective problem. I'm looking through the wrong lens, too short-term or too personal. All right, once we've shifted the lens, we can move on to the next kind of framing, which is kind of how am I thinking about this? And this is what I would call meta models. Meta models of how can I think about the situation differently or from a different kind of angle. All right, so the framing of the situation. So some good framings that I come back often include first principles, where this is where you look at what's really true here, what are the assumptions I've held on to, and if I strip those all away, what remains. All right, and this helps you when you get trapped in what you should be doing, what needs to be done. You look at someone like Elon Musk, he always thinks in first principles. He thinks what doesn't defy the laws of physics that I can actually go back to. Because you really think a lot of situations, there's a lot of rules in place, what you need to do, but very often it's just people who've come up with ideas and we follow along. And first principles allows you to go, what's really true here? What assumptions have I made? And if we get rid of all those assumptions, what remains? Another frame I like to use is systems thinking. And this is realizing that many things interact. So what's the bigger picture and how are all these things interacting with each other? So often when you make one small decision, it impacts big decisions. For example, what time you go to bed impacts what time you wake up in the morning. How much sleep you get impacts your mood that day. And small decisions make an impact on bigger things, all right? And we all live in a global economy. Our small behaviors can impact a large amount of people, all right? So we need to think about how my decisions, small ones, are impacting the bigger ones. So this is really helpful when I'm thinking about the impact of small decisions on my big long-term goals. Another frame I like to use is second order thinking. And this is basically where you question what next and then what next. So what you do is you realize the short-term consequences of a decision often don't meet up with the long-term consequences. So a good example is I feel hungry and I want to eat some food. So I decide I want to eat something nice. So I think, what should I have? And I'm thinking a donut or a chocolate bar. And all of a sudden I'm thinking in terms of this is going to be really nice. So the first order consequences are this is going to be pleasurable. But the second order consequences are this will make me feel shitty after. I will regret eating this. All right, so the second order is what happens after, all right, the kind of the step after that. So when you skip the workout, yep, you get a chill out, but the second order consequences, you feel guilty or you don't feel proud of yourself for missing that. So it's very good for thinking about how your decisions are playing out long term, all right, and stop you getting caught in impulse. Often we get too optimistic about things or we get too pessimistic, all right? We think this is going to work out well or, we don't really think about the short-term and long-term kind of risks or cost benefits. So second order thinking is just thinking through, if I do this, then what will happen? If you want to play the game even further, you think a few moves ahead, like a chess player. The best chess players think something like 20 odd moves ahead. We want to think at least 2 moves ahead, so we're not really being impulsive and caught in that moment. And the final framing I like to use often is probabilistic thinking. And this is like, what are the likelihood of events happening and what's the upside and downside? Poker players, very good at this in general, in terms of poker. And it's thinking about what is the likelihood of each thing happening so I can make good decisions. This stops you being overly impulsive. It stops you making bad investment decisions. It stops you jumping into projects that seem really good on the surface, but might lead to a bad outcome. So if we're doing things in terms of 50-50 decisions, you don't need to use probabilistic thinking because the mind's very good at that. But as soon as, like, say, you're putting 100,000 into an investment and 10% of the time you're going to 10x your money and 90% of the time you're going to lose it all, now we're in a very different equation. The mind can't really deal with this on a calculated level. So we need to think about probabilistically, am I okay with it? And the way I like to do it, I like to go, am I okay with the worst case scenarios of the probabilities? And are the upsides worth the downsides? All right, so is the risk to reward worth it? But really thinking about the probabilities, the likelihood of events, and not just getting caught up in this is going to work. Like, you need to use probabilistic thinking when you're really excited about something. You go, this is 100% going to work. As soon as you say 100%, you're already in a really sketchy zone, unless I can't think of an example where you'd be that confident. But generally, you're blindsided. You're not thinking probabilistically, because even the 100% often have a less than 1% or 1% more 1% chance of happening. There's a book called The Black Swan Effect by Nassim Taleb, which talks about this, where the odds of seeing a black swan are 0. All right, so those are all white swans. But when one black swan appears, all of a sudden it goes from 0 to 1, and that changes everything. So it looks like a 0 chance event of there being a black swan until it happens. All right, so COVID, for example, is a black swan event. Nobody calculated it into their predictive models of economies, of business models, but it happened. And it wrecked a lot of businesses and caused a lot of problems. So that's just an example of probabilistic thinking and realizing that we don't know outcomes and we need to factor in the likelihood of good and bad happening, and just thinking about your decisions like that. All right, so you've got the right lens to look through in terms of the right perspective. You've got the right framing for the situation. Now you can start thinking about what tools to use, what mental models. And this is where most people start. They start trying to think, how can I think about this situation differently? But I think the tools and the mental models come very well once you've already done those kind of higher level ones, those kind of meta models. And the perspective, for me, they just seem to sit way above these kind of ones I'm going to share now. I found it helpful to think of your mental models as having 3 layers. The first is your cognitive tools. And these are the ones that help you overcome your cognitive biases. There's a whole host of cognitive biases that we could go into, maybe in a different video. But these include things like opportunity cost, where you think about what am I missing out on. There's things like the sunk cost fallacy, where when you put money into something or energy into something, you don't want to give it up. I mean, realizing that we need to find ways to have a get out clause. The confirmation bias, where we realize we're prone to seek information that confirms what we already think. So there's loads of these kind of cognitive tools we need to build into our frameworks to allow us to override a lot of these biases we have. Then there's behavioral tools. And these are ones that help you to figure out what you're avoiding or not taking action on. It's when you're not moving towards your goals, and why is that? Generally, it's the feelings not aligning with the behavior you're doing. Maybe you haven't got the energy, maybe you're not motivated enough, and really understanding how to get your habits moving in the right direction. So it might be removing friction in your environment, it might be making things easier to do in terms of healthy eating. To say your fridge is only full of healthy foods, that's going to make it easier to eat healthy foods. It's things like blocking distractions, maybe your phone's on airplane mode or in a different room, and really thinking about how you can use behavioral tools to make better decisions and not rely on willpower all the time. And then we've got strategic tools. These are ones when we're in competitions, trying to get outcomes. They include game theory, where we're trying to think about how our decisions impact the larger decisions. We're thinking in terms of long-term payoffs. We're thinking in terms of equilibrium. We're thinking in terms of how to make decisions that are going to lead to the outcome I want. And creating a strategy for my thinking. And when we're involved in any sort of competition, coming from a poker background, strategic thinking is very much involved in how we're trying to come up with strategies to beat opponents. But in life in general, we're generally competing to get to places, to achieve goals, and strategic tools to help you make better decisions are very helpful. So without overcomplicating things and going super deep on a million different things, I don't try to memorize 100 mental models. I try to use a few over and over. I try to find situations where I can apply a certain mental model and use it to make better decisions. So for example, the mental model of inversion, which is a cognitive tool, is where you think about guaranteeing failure. What would this look like if it failed? I used that before I launched this YouTube channel. I thought, okay, what happens if every video completely flops? I get no views. I was like, okay, well, I would have learned how to shoot videos quickly, how to blog effectively, and I would have probably got better at recording videos, even if I got 0 views. Or I might use systems thinking to reflect on how my morning routine impacts the rest of my day. When I meditate in the morning, go for a walk, how does that impact my productivity for the rest of the day? Or I might use probabilistic thinking when weighing up taking on a new project or a new investment. How likely is this thing to work out? How likely is this to fail? And am I okay with the trade-offs of each of those outcomes? So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. And clear thinking isn't something that just happens overnight. It's a practice. It's a skill that we need to get better at. Like I said at the start, our minds aren't built to slow things down and to really think deeply. We've got a lot of biases we have, a lot of shortcuts, a lot of things the brain does quickly and reactively. So we need to fight back against that. And you need to develop your own sort of toolkit for making good decisions in your life. So hopefully this sparks some ideas, give you some insights, but also got you to question how you make decisions. Because this is what really matters in your life is what decisions are you making and what frameworks or tools will be helpful for you. So have a little think about it in terms of the frame, in terms of the meta models, in terms of the lens, the perspective you can use, and then have a look into the actual mental models and the tools you can use. And there's a whole deep dive you can do into this world to think about the tools and mental models you can have in order to make clear decisions. At the end of the day, everybody wants to make good decisions. We want to think logically, clearly about the short-term and long-term payoffs, and that takes practice and a bit of training.